finally, today, our next guest is an artist who's been studying and communicating the value and history of the North American bison. Michelle Wilson is a PhD candidate in art and visual culture at Western University, and she's currently curating an exhibition at the Macintosh Gallery at Western. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. What first drew you to studying bison?
I was lucky enough to be invited as an artist in residence at Riding Mountain National Park in Manitoba in 2016. And I had gone to listen and learn from bison communication and speak to the people at the park who work with the bison and Indigenous people who work with the park. And I fell in love with the bison. They were so much more complicated and interesting than I could have imagined. But I was also interested in the stories that I was being told as someone enjoying the park and all the things that I felt that story left out. And so I really wanted to follow that story where it would lead me.
Yeah. Tell us a bit more about what you mean when you say that they're complicated. Do you mean our general perception of that animal as Canadians?
Oh, yeah. So I think ecologically and socially, they're more complex than we would imagine. I think a lot of people perceive bison as bigger, hairier cows. But what we can see in bison is the really interwoven, connected relationship between beings and different grasses, seasons, and microbes. Also, their complex social structure as a matrilineal structure. And how misunderstood our relationship with them as settler Canadians is, and the stories we tell about them.
You've said that there is a relationship between the control of bison populations and the agenda of colonialism. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. In the U.S., you see a much more explicit eradication of the bison, where the U.S. military was fighting Indigenous people. In Canada, their eradication came with the fur trade and the Hudson's Bay Company, not because their ropes were being traded significantly in Canada, but because they were being killed to feed trappers and traders. But bison are an migratory animal that covers a huge amount of space, and so those national borders didn't matter to them. And the pressure on both sides really drove their numbers down to almost nothing around the 1900s. And though the Canadian government wasn't explicitly going out and killing bison the way that the American government was, certainly took advantage of the privation and hunger that followed their eradication to force First Nations peoples to accept treaties and reserves.
Mm. Well, tell us a bit more about your artwork and what people will see at this exhibit.
Yeah, so it's on one more day at the Macintosh Gallery, but it is available to see as a video walkthrough on the Macintosh Gallery's website. I work in a lot of different mediums. Some of my pieces are textile works that look at mapping and data, but a much more intimate sense, more narrative sense than we get from a lot of maps. My maps follow bison and wolves. Others are exploring the use of bison's bones as a medium for telling their own stories. So when bison were eradicated from the plains, their bones were left on the ground, and a huge industry boom happened for about 10 years where people would pick those bleached bones up. And one of the uses for them was creating an ink called bone black ink. And so I became really interested in how a creature's own story of their annihilation could be written, in their own bodies. Wow. And so I've done some material kind of explorations, research with making inks out of bison bones as a way of communicating that loss.
Wow, that sounds fascinating and powerful. Michelle, congrats on this, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's Michelle Wilson, a PhD candidate in art and visual culture at Western University. Her exhibit at the Macintosh Gallery at Western is called Remnants, Outlaws, and Wallows, Practices for Understanding Bison. You could see it in person at the gallery until tomorrow, but you can also see the online version at macintoshgallery.ca.